On November 13th, 1998, a brilliant mathematician and NSA analyst was brutally murdered in her suburban Maryland home. The crime scene was so violent, the blood splattered so extensively, that investigators immediately assumed this was personal, a crime of passion committed by someone who knew and hated the victim. Every piece of evidence pointed to one obvious suspect, her controlling ex-husband who had threatened her with a gun and was fighting for custody of their child. But when the truth finally emerged 7 months later, it came from the last place anyone expected. The real killer wasn't driven by jealousy or custody battles. Instead, this case would reveal a conspiracy so twisted that even hardened detectives couldn't believe it. The person who orchestrated this murder had been hiding behind a mask of concerned family member, playing the role of caring grandmother while plotting the ultimate betrayal. Sarah Williamson was born on June 20th, 1963, on a military base in Florida, the younger of 2 daughters in a family shaped by service and discipline. Her father's military career meant frequent relocations, teaching Sarah early to adapt quickly and make friends wherever she landed. When the family finally settled in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Sarah was ready to put down roots and excel. From her first days in school, teachers recognized something exceptional. This wasn't just a bright student, but someone with a genuinely gifted mathematical mind. Testing revealed Sarah had an extraordinarily high IQ, particularly in logical and mathematical reasoning. While other students struggled with algebra, Sarah was teaching herself calculus from library books. She devoured detective novels, fascinated by the logical puzzles and deductive reasoning they presented. By high school, she'd begun outlining her own mystery novel, combining her love of mathematics with crime solving, a story about a statistician who uses data patterns to catch killers. Her social life was equally successful. Sarah's intelligence never made her aloof or superior. She tutored struggling classmates, organised study groups, and maintained a wide circle of friends. Her older sister remained her closest confidant, the two sharing everything from teenage crushes to career dreams. Sarah spoke often about wanting to work in intelligence or defence, using her mathematical gifts to serve her country like her father had. She participated in math competitions, winning state championships and earning scholarship offers from prestigious universities. At the University of New Mexico, Sarah majored in mathematics with a minor in computer science. She met Cohen during a statistics seminar. He was pursuing engineering, equally ambitious and driven. They bonded over late-night study sessions and shared career goals. After graduation in 1985, they married in a small ceremony, both landing jobs at Sandia National Laboratories. Sarah thought she'd found her perfect match, someone who understood her drive and supported her ambitions, but Sarah's talents were too significant to remain in New Mexico. In 1988, the National Security Agency recruited her for a position as a statistical analysis expert at their Maryland headquarters. This was the opportunity she'd dreamed of, working on classified projects using mathematics to protect national security. Cohen supported the move, finding work in Baltimore's growing tech sector. They bought a house in Columbia, a planned community between Baltimore and Washington, and settled into what seemed like an ideal life. At NSA, Sarah quickly distinguished herself. Her supervisors noted her ability to see patterns others missed, to extract meaning from seemingly random datasets. She worked on classified projects involving signal intelligence and code breaking, though the specific nature of her work remained secret even from family. Colleagues described her as brilliant but approachable, someone who could explain complex concepts in simple terms. She received multiple commendations and was fast-tracked for promotion, one of the youngest analysts to reach her security clearance level. In her spare time, Sarah returned to her detective novel, now incorporating real mathematical concepts she'd learned at NSA. She joined a writers' group, attended mystery conventions, and dreamed of publication. The manuscript grew to over 300 pages, featuring a protagonist who used statistical analysis to solve crimes that traditional detective work couldn't crack. But after 3 years of marriage, cracks began appearing in her relationship with Cohen. He grew distant, spending more time at work or out with friends. They tried counselling, but ultimately decided to divorce amicably in 1991. Sarah was 28, disappointed but determined to move forward. Wanting to further her career, Sarah enrolled in evening classes at Johns Hopkins University, pursuing a master's degree in applied statistics. There she met Lorenzo Garrett, a 25-year-old MBA student from a prominent Baltimore family. Lorenzo was charming, attentive, everything Cohen hadn't been. He brought her flowers, attended her thesis presentations, showed genuine interest in her work despite not understanding the mathematics. His family owned several businesses in Baltimore, and he promised Sarah a life of both intellectual fulfillment and financial security. They married in 1993, moving to Elkridge, an upscale suburb perfectly positioned between Sarah's job at NSA and Lorenzo's family businesses in Baltimore. The house was everything Sarah had dreamed of: a colonial on 2 acres with a home office where she could write, a large backyard for future children, and a sophisticated alarm system that made her feel secure given her sensitive government work. Lorenzo's parents, Amelia and Michael Sr., lived just 15 minutes away and initially seemed welcoming, though Sarah noticed Amelia could be overbearing, offering unsolicited advice about everything from decorating to career choices. Amelia Garrett came from old Baltimore money, her family having made their fortune in shipping and real estate. She'd married Michael Sr. when she was just 19, dedicating her life to raising their 2 sons and maintaining their social status. She was active in charity work, serving on several boards, cultivating an image of refinement and generosity. But beneath this polished exterior was a woman who needed absolute control, especially over her family. In 1995, Sarah gave birth to their son, Adam. She took 3 months of maternity leave, the maximum NSA allowed for someone in her position. Sarah adapted quickly to motherhood, creating detailed schedules that balanced Adam's needs with her return to work. She hired a part-time nanny and established routines that would allow her to maintain her career while being present for her son. She documented every milestone in detailed journals, approaching motherhood with the same analytical precision she brought to her work. But Lorenzo changed dramatically after Adam's birth. He'd been taking antidepressants for mild anxiety, but stopped abruptly, claiming he didn't want to be drugged around his son. Without medication, his mood swings intensified. He showed little interest in caring for Adam, complaining when the baby cried, refusing to help with night feedings. More disturbingly, he grew jealous of the attention Sarah gave their son. He'd make snide comments about being replaced, about Sarah caring more for the baby than for him. Amelia began visiting more frequently, criticizing Sarah's parenting choices. She insisted Sarah was holding Adam wrong, feeding him incorrectly, not following proper sleep schedules. She brought books on child rearing, all emphasizing traditional methods that conflicted with Sarah's pediatrician's advice. When Sarah politely declined to follow Amelia's suggestions, the older woman would purse her lips and make passive-aggressive comments about modern mothers who think they know better than experience. The accusations from Lorenzo started small. He would question why Sarah was late from work, suggesting she was having an affair. When she worked on classified projects requiring longer hours, he'd show up at NSA's visitor center, demanding to see her, creating security incidents. His paranoia focused on Sarah's boss, James Mitchell, a married man 20 years her senior who'd been nothing but professional. Lorenzo hired a private investigator to follow Sarah, convinced he'd find evidence of infidelity. When the private investigator found nothing, Lorenzo's paranoia only intensified. He accused Sarah of being clever enough to hide the affair, of using her NSA training to avoid detection. His accusations triggered an internal NSA investigation, requiring Sarah and dozens of colleagues to undergo polygraph tests and extensive interviews. The investigation was humiliating for Sarah, her personal life exposed to colleagues and superiors who'd previously known her only as a consummate professional. The investigation cleared Sarah completely, but the damage to her reputation was significant. Colleagues who'd once seen her as a rising star now associated her with drama and security concerns. Her next performance review, while still positive, noted personal situations affecting workplace efficiency. Lorenzo refused to accept the investigation's findings, his paranoia escalating. During one argument, he pulled out a handgun he'd recently purchased, waving it while accusing her of lying. Sarah grabbed Adam and locked herself in the nursery, calling 911. Police responded, but Lorenzo claimed it was a misunderstanding, that he'd simply been showing her the gun for home protection. Without witnesses or physical violence, police took no action beyond filing a report. The next day, Sarah filed for divorce and obtained a temporary restraining order. When Lorenzo learned about the divorce filing, he attempted to strike her while she held Adam. She fell, protecting the baby, but injuring her shoulder. Lorenzo grabbed Adam from her arms and drove to his parents' house. For 12 agonizing hours, Sarah didn't know where her son was. She called everyone, police, lawyers, even FBI contacts from work. Lorenzo finally called, stating she'd never see Adam again unless she withdrew the divorce papers and agreed to his terms. Instead, Sarah went directly to the police, then to court, obtaining an emergency custody order. The judge was appalled by Lorenzo's behaviour, granting Sarah primary custody with Lorenzo receiving supervised visitation every other weekend. The custody battle turned vicious. Lorenzo's family wealth afforded him excellent lawyers who portrayed Sarah as a negligent mother prioritising her career over her child. They highlighted her long hours at NSA, the classified nature of her work preventing her from discussing daily activities. Emilia testified that Sarah was cold, calculating, an unfit mother who didn't follow proper child-rearing practices. She claimed Sarah fed Adam inappropriate foods, let him cry too long, didn't provide proper emotional nurturing. The stress was overwhelming, but Sarah's meticulous documentation of Lorenzo's behaviour ultimately prevailed. Sarah's sister later recalled a conversation just days before the murder. Sarah had called, voice shaking, saying she was genuinely afraid of what Lorenzo might do. But surprisingly, she was even more worried about Emilia. "There's something off about her," Sarah had said. "The way she looks at me when I drop off Adam, like she wishes I would just disappear." Sarah made her sister promise that if anything happened to her, she'd fight to keep Adam away from the Garrett family. By November 1998, the divorce was final, but custody arrangements remained contentious. Lorenzo had visitation rights but was forbidden from taking Adam out of state after attempting to obtain a passport for the boy. Sarah feared he planned to flee to Italy, where his family had connections. Every exchange was tense, usually conducted at Lorenzo's parents' house, with Emilia supervising to prevent confrontations. The older woman would stand in the doorway, holding Adam, staring at Sarah with undisguised contempt. On Friday, November 13th, 1998, Sarah dropped Adam off for his weekend visit. The handoff was typically cold, Emilia taking the boy without a word while Lorenzo stayed inside, refusing to face his ex-wife. Sarah spent Saturday with her best friend Laura, trying to decompress from the week's stress. They watched movies, drank wine, and Sarah spoke optimistically about the future. Once the custody situation stabilised, she could focus on her career and her novel, building a new life for herself and Adam. She talked about maybe dating again, finding someone who could be a positive male role model for her son. Sunday morning, November 14th, Laura expected Sarah's usual morning call. They had a tradition of Sunday coffee conversations even when apart. But 9 a.m. passed, then 10 with no call. Laura tried calling Sarah but got no answer. Checking her answering machine, she found a message received at 8:46 p.m. the previous night. Playing it back, Laura heard sounds that made her blood run cold. Crashing noises, Sarah's screams, sounds of a violent struggle. The message lasted 2 minutes before cutting off. Laura immediately called 911, begging police to check on her friend. Officers arrived at Sarah's Elkridge home within 20 minutes. The first sign of trouble was the broken window beside the front door, glass scattered on the porch. The door itself was locked, deadbolt engaged. Officers circled to the back, finding the sliding glass door open. Strangely, the alarm system was armed but hadn't triggered. This detail would later prove crucial. It suggested the intruder knew exactly how the system worked. Entering through the back, weapons drawn, officers found a scene of shocking violence. Sarah's body lay in the living room, blood covering the floor, walls, and even ceiling. The sheer amount of blood suggested a prolonged, frenzied attack. The room showed signs of a struggle: overturned furniture, broken lamps, pictures knocked from walls. Officers immediately searched for Adam, not knowing he was with his father. They checked every closet, under beds, even the attic, fearing the child might be hiding or hurt. The crime scene told a confusing story. The killer had apparently entered through the front window, despite the back of the house offering more concealment. The alarm system was connected to window frames, not the glass itself, suggesting the intruder knew exactly how to avoid triggering it. Bloody boot prints led from the body back to the front window, indicating the killer's exit route. The prints were from men's work boots, size 10, a common enough size that it provided little help in identifying the perpetrator. The living room showed signs of ransacking. VHS tapes were scattered across the floor, pulled from their storage cabinet. The VCR was missing, along with some electronics. Kitchen cabinets stood open, drawers pulled out, yet Sarah's laptop sat untouched on the kitchen table, her wallet beside it with cash visible. This selective theft made no sense. Why take a VCR worth maybe $50, but leave a laptop worth thousands? Investigators immediately suspected the scene was staged to look like a burglary. The medical examiner's findings were horrific. Sarah had suffered over 40 stab wounds, far exceeding what was necessary to kill. The wounds showed no pattern, suggesting frenzied rage rather than calculated murder. Some wounds were shallow, hesitation marks perhaps, while others were deep enough to damage internal organs. Defensive wounds on her hands and arms indicated she'd fought desperately. The sheer brutality suggested personal hatred. This wasn't a random burglary gone wrong. Time of death was estimated between 8:30 and 9 p.m, consistent with the answering machine message. In the backyard, investigators found the murder weapon, a machete partially hidden under leaves. Blood and tissue on the blade matched Sarah's injuries. But the machete also contained something crucial: blood from a second person, presumably the killer who'd been injured during the struggle. This DNA evidence would prove vital, though its significance wouldn't be understood for months. The machete itself was generic, sold at dozens of stores, impossible to trace. Investigators immediately focused on Lorenzo. The acrimonious divorce, custody battle, and history of violence made him the obvious suspect. When detectives informed him of Sarah's death, his reaction seemed theatrical, falling to his knees, wailing dramatically. Yet he quickly composed himself, suggesting they investigate James Mitchell, Sarah's boss, reviving his old affair allegations. He seemed more interested in pushing his narrative than in his son's well-being, never asking how to explain this to Adam. Lorenzo claimed he'd been home all evening with his parents and brother. His family confirmed this alibi, though investigators suspected they might be lying. A search of Lorenzo's car and parents' home revealed no evidence. No blood, no boots matching the crime scene prints, no connection to the machete. Lorenzo had hired a prominent defense attorney who severely limited police access to his client. The lawyer, known for defending Baltimore's wealthy elite, made it clear that any questioning would require a warrant. The investigation expanded to include Sarah's NSA work. Given her access to classified information, investigators couldn't rule out espionage or foreign intelligence involvement. NSA conducted its own parallel investigation, examining whether Sarah had been targeted for information she possessed. They found no evidence of compromise, no unusual contacts, no signs she'd been approached by foreign agents. Her work computer showed no unauthorized access, no suspicious downloads. Whatever secrets Sarah knew had apparently died with her. Meanwhile, FBI audio experts enhanced Laura's answering machine recording. Initially, detectives thought they heard Sarah scream Mike during the attack. This led them to Lorenzo's brother, Michelangelo Mike Garrett, who lived with his parents. Mike's nervous behavior during questioning, visible shaking, vomiting after the interview, seemed suspicious. He was unemployed, had a history of drug use, and had always resented Sarah for breaking up the family. But he maintained his innocence, and his DNA didn't match the blood on the machete. The enhanced audio later revealed Sarah hadn't screamed anyone's name. It was just an inarticulate cry of terror. This eliminated one of the few leads investigators had. With Lorenzo's DNA also not matching the blood evidence, the case began to stall. Detectives had been so certain it was Lorenzo that they'd focused most of their resources on building a case against him. Now they had to start over, expanding their investigation in new directions. Months passed with no progress. The detective team was reduced as resources were needed elsewhere. Sarah's murder was becoming another cold case. Her family held press conferences pleading for information. Her sister offered a personal reward of $10,000, later increased to $25,000, with contributions from Sarah's NSA colleagues. But tips that came in led nowhere. Supposed sightings of suspicious people that couldn't be verified, psychics claiming supernatural knowledge, conspiracy theorists linking her death to government cover-ups. Then, on June 1st, 1999, 7 months after the murder, Baltimore County Jail called with shocking news. An inmate named Ardell Tickles, 19 years old, had confessed to killing a woman in Elkridge. Ardell was awaiting trial for armed robbery of a McDonald's, facing serious time. His cellmate, working as an informant, had recorded Ardell describing the murder in chilling detail. Ardell knew things only the killer would know: the broken front window, the machete, the scattered VHS tapes, even the pattern of wounds on Sarah's body. He described entering through the front window specifically because he knew the alarm wouldn't trigger. He talked about the victim fighting back harder than expected, how she'd scratched his arm deeply enough to scar. He described the murder with disturbing pride, saying he'd wanted the victim to suffer, that he'd made sure she knew she was dying. But his motive shocked investigators. Ardale claimed he'd been paid $5,000 by a former co-worker to kill Sarah because she was allegedly racist, had pushed a pregnant black woman downstairs and spit on her. Detectives rushed to interview Ardale. Confronted with the recorded confession, he didn't deny anything. He was proud of killing Sarah, believing she deserved it for her supposed racism. He showed them the scar on his arm where Sarah had scratched him, still visible 7 months later. But when shown photos of Lorenzo, Mike and their father, Ardale recognized none of them. The person who hired him, he revealed, was a woman, someone he'd worked with at a nursing home laundry. She was older, maybe in her 60s, always nicely dressed despite working in administration. Investigators obtained employee records from the nursing home where Ardale had worked. As they reviewed the list, one name made everything click into place: Amelia Garrett, Lorenzo's mother. She worked part-time in the facility's administrative office, occasionally interacting with laundry staff. When shown Amelia's photo, Ardale immediately identified her as the woman who'd hired him. "That's her," he said. "She told me that woman was evil, that she was keeping her grandson from his family." The full story began emerging. Amelia had befriended Ardale at work, learning about his financial struggles and criminal tendencies. She'd painted Sarah as a racist monster who was keeping her grandson away from his loving family. She'd driven Ardale to Sarah's house days before the murder, showing him the layout, explaining the alarm system, telling him when Sarah would be alone. She'd even drawn him a diagram of the alarm system, showing which windows were connected and which weren't. Ardale had believed he was striking a blow against racism while earning desperately needed money. He'd never known Sarah was actually Amelia's daughter-in-law, that the child Amelia sometimes brought to work was Sarah's son. When detectives revealed the truth, that Sarah had no history of racism, that she was a devoted mother fighting to protect her child from an unstable ex-husband, Ardale was genuinely devastated. "She lied to me," he kept saying. "That old lady lied about everything." A co-worker, granted immunity, corroborated Ardale's story. She'd rented him a car the day of the murder, thinking his talk of becoming a killer was just posturing. When he returned covered in blood, claiming he'd gotten rid of the devil, she'd helped him burn his boots in a vacant lot. Police had even stopped them that night, finding a bloody knife in the car, but inexplicably let them go without arrest. The officers involved couldn't explain why they hadn't detained 2 people with blood evidence in their vehicle. Bank records showed Amelia withdrawing $2,500 weeks before the murder, with similar amounts appearing in Ardale's account shortly after. His DNA matched the blood on the machete perfectly. The evidence was overwhelming, but prosecutors wanted Amelia's confession to ensure conviction. They knew a good defense attorney could argue Ardale acted alone, that Amelia's money was for something else, that her visits to Sarah's house were innocent grandmother activities. Detectives arrested Amelia at her home. Her call to Lorenzo was revealing. She simply said she was being arrested, and he didn't even ask why, suggesting possible foreknowledge. Initially, Amelia demanded a lawyer. But when detectives mentioned that Lorenzo's knowledge of the murder could cost him custody of Adam permanently, she wavered. After hours of internal struggle, she agreed to confess. Amelia's version was self-serving and unconvincing. She claimed she'd only wanted Ardale to vandalize Sarah's house, maybe throw rocks to scare her. She insisted the murder was Ardale's idea, that she'd never intended for Sarah to die. She painted herself as a grandmother desperate to maintain contact with her grandson, driven to extremes by Sarah's coldness and controlling nature. She claimed Sarah had been poisoning Adam against his father's family, filling his head with lies. Detectives knew this was largely fiction. You don't pay someone $2,500 to throw rocks. You don't provide detailed intelligence about alarm systems for vandalism. Amelia had knowingly sent a violent young man to attack her daughter-in-law, then acted the grieving family member when the murder was discovered. She'd comforted her son, held her grandson, all while knowing she'd orchestrated his mother's death. At trial, Ardale was convicted first. He expressed remorse, claiming Amelia had manipulated him into killing an innocent woman. His youth and manipulation were considered, but the brutality of the murder ensured a life sentence without parole. He destroyed multiple lives for $2,500 and a lie about racism. During his testimony, He broke down crying, genuine tears this time, as Sarah's sister described the woman he'd killed, the mother he'd taken from a 3-year-old boy. Emilia's trial followed in January 2000. Her family, including Lorenzo, didn't attend. Her defense attorney tried arguing she'd never intended murder, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury convicted her of first-degree murder, conspiracy and solicitation to commit murder. Like Ardale, she received life without parole. At 68 years old, Emilia would die in prison. During sentencing, she showed no emotion as Sarah's family described their loss, maintaining the cold demeanour that had characterised her throughout the investigation. The aftermath was devastating for all involved. Adam, only 3 when his mother was murdered, grew up without her, raised by the family that had orchestrated her death. Lorenzo maintained his ignorance of his mother's plan, and no evidence ever emerged to contradict this. He remarried, had 3 more children, and died in 2023 at age 57, taking any knowledge of his involvement to the grave. Adam, now 29, has reportedly struggled with the truth about his family, undergoing years of therapy to process the betrayal. Sarah's colleagues at NSA were stunned by the revelation. They'd assumed her murder was related to her classified work or her ex-husband's jealousy. That her mother-in-law had orchestrated it over custody fears seemed almost incomprehensible. The agency implemented new security protocols for employees facing domestic issues, recognizing that threats could come from unexpected sources. A memorial plaque in the NSA's Maryland headquarters honors Sarah's service. The case highlighted multiple system failures. Police had stopped Ardale with bloody evidence the night of the murder but let him go. The nursing home had employed Ardale despite his criminal record, allowing him access to vulnerable populations. The family court system had failed to protect Sarah despite documented threats from Lorenzo. Each failure contributed to a preventable tragedy. Reforms following the case included mandatory reporting of domestic threats involving custody disputes and improved background checks for healthcare facility employees. In 2009, Emilia appealed her conviction, bizarrely stating she'd forgiven Sarah for not deserving death. This tone-deaf statement only reinforced her narcissism and lack of genuine remorse. Her appeal was denied. Now 89, she remains in Maryland Correctional Institution for Women, one of the oldest inmates in the system. She's reportedly in failing health, but continues to maintain she never intended for Sarah to die. Ardale, now 44, has spent over half his life in prison. His 2024 parole application was denied, the board citing the heinous nature of the crime and insufficient rehabilitation. He's found religion in prison, claims deep remorse, but the board questioned whether someone capable of such brutality for money could ever be safely released. He's become a cautionary tale within the prison system about how easily young people can be manipulated into violence. The case remains a cautionary tale about hidden dangers within families. Sarah had identified her ex-husband as the threat, obtaining restraining orders, documenting his violence. She never suspected that the real danger came from her mother-in-law, the grandmother who smiled during custody exchanges while plotting murder. It reminds us that evil can hide behind familiar faces, that the people who claim to love our children might be capable of unconscionable acts. Sarah Williamson was brilliant, accomplished, a devoted mother who did everything right to protect herself and her son. She worked for her country's security, contributed to protecting others, yet the system failed to protect her. Her novel about a statistician solving murders was never published, its manuscript found in her home office, another dream cut short by senseless violence. Years later, her sister had the manuscript privately printed, distributing copies to family and friends as a memorial to Sarah's creativity. The Elkridge community was forever changed. Neighbours who'd felt safe in their upscale suburb realised that danger could come from within, from family members driven by perverted love and control. Sarah's death sparked conversations about custody rights, grandparents' involvement, and the warning signs of escalating family violence that continue today. The house where she died stood empty for years, locals considering it cursed until it was finally demolished and the lot subdivided. This case stands as one of Maryland's most shocking murders, not because of its brutality — sadly domestic murders are all too common — but because of its twisted orchestration. A grandmother hiring a teenage co-worker to murder her daughter-in-law, manipulating him with lies about racism, all to maintain control over a grandchild. It's a plot that would seem far-fetched in Sarah's beloved detective novels, yet it happened in real life, proving once again that truth is stranger and more terrible than fiction.